He died as the ultimate legendary warrior who ruled legends for generations before anyone else ever lived. He had everyone thinking he invented magic, and he finally collapsed and cast a legendary 15th ranked spell that completely tore apart the toughest demons. Yet he slipped back into the underworld simply because his tiny chakra was weak, much like Kakashi. The boy who was once Kusanagi Minato is now back in his original form, only to find that every single human being he meets is merely a helpless, useless junkie. The very person who created the magic will soon have to enroll in a magical academy. You don't need any cute girls. The world is full of them already. The hero found his own soul wandering in a dream world, and for centuries now, the only person who knows where he truly belongs was someone else who had just been transported there by accident. Our hero suddenly stepped into the spotlight like a star in a galaxy of chaos. The doctor kept trying to explain his quick recovery, but nothing came out of him. Oh, you know what I mean? It really feels as though he possesses a hidden power of pure divine light, which is definitely true, since he actually does hold such something very special. In 1970, he passed away, and today the whole world feels very calm. TVs are so slim, they make people wonder if they're actually looking at K-pop or trying to follow the latest fashion trends. You're sure the brain has finally surrendered? He walks back into his father's garden after a long time, feeling like the old man is always watching him from afar. The truck caught the family's attention back before they got home, forcing him to grow up on his own while holding on to some of that money as a gift from his parents. He looks around nervously because life's magic isn't real, so he wonders if that God has hidden the secret or if it's all a lucky slip of luck. Trust me, now he's a student at a magic academy and he's already interested. A sudden call interrupts the quiet, yet he refuses to answer and moves on instead. And of course, that old bully had a habit of bullying anyone who wasn't strong enough to beat him back. The next day brought us to the classroom of Kamui Magic Academy, where our brave heroes gather for their first magic training session. A sudden spell was cast that barely held up against the light of an ordinary lighter. The most powerful mage in the world felt truly crushed by this terrible disappointment. Watching them all turned his eyes to trash, and suddenly, the world was full of waste. He didn't even catch a glimpse of those new dance trends before they took over the stage. In the past, every little kid could actually beat that expert at 10 times faster. Maybe the peace isn't real anymore because the world feels so calm that everyone forgets how dangerous they are. Walking into the room, he felt really at ease, wondering if anyone was around to chat with him. Suddenly, a loud voice shouted from behind the bar. His face twisted into rage as he demanded to know why Minato had been so rude yesterday. Main simply asked who he was, and that alone made the redhead lose her grip on reality. The fight between the two men ended in a complete disaster when Minato couldn't stop kicking, forcing the attacker to switch tactics entirely by making Minato look like the ultimate trash for no good reason at all. And only when Minato finally understood that the person he had been talking to was himself, did he assume they were close friends. Tadanakin snapped when he realized his friend had forgotten to pay him back. Instead of offering a deal that would make things work out, the man immediately told him to act cool and ignore the problem entirely, causing the redhead to feel more furious than ever before. Tadano knows those inheritance dollars are stuck in a vault, so he's determined to get them. It was only when Monadu finally understood that Body had been bullied before he could do anything about it. The red-headed girl ran straight for her lunch tray as the class started moving in, but she only realized her mistake moments after she reached the door. You are not just a character. This girl is the heart of our school's magic and the only one who truly can save us all. My twin brother has such a bright blue hair and eyes, but his most striking feature is the way he always wears that deep blue tie over everything else. The story starts with a giant white skirt that looks almost too big for the person sitting in front of it. Oh no. Tadano's face goes instantly crimson, and he feels so shy as if he were actually a dog having the most exciting mating season ever. He was so angry that he told Minato to remember him before leaving, then kicked everything along for good measure. On the board, there was an announcement about the biggest global disaster in history. The teacher asked the class to share their thoughts on that big event. Then the man revealed that it had been humanity's final great tragedy, but back then the whole world had been overrun by monsters. Yet, the founder of magic, Ichikami Minato, chose a different path and fought those monsters alone after killing one high-ranking demon. He ended up dying, and since then, no other catastrophe has ever occurred. That very second, the teacher pointed to a young girl with bright blue hair who raised her hand, smiled, and said, "You're the only one who saved humanity because you were the last survivor of that disaster and made history as the first mage in all time." As his eyes shone with realization, he confirmed the truth revealing that the academy wasn't just a training ground for mages. It was designed specifically for those who could finally find themselves inside it. The protagonist shuddered violently as reality pulled away from his shoulders, realizing this humiliation had just become a necessary part of the game. He narrowed his eyes to recall the doctor's warning about magic fading as peace spread, then looked out the window in quiet contemplation. He smiled softly and knew the ending was perfect. The teacher slammed a sign to shut down the classroom before dawn, leaving everyone with an empty stomach for the magical power assessment tomorrow. Tedino laughed as he noted that the classmates' lack of power sounded like such a cruel joke. Ishami chuckled, knowing his own frustration would prove too much for the bully to take seriously at all. The redhead was not ignored. Instead, our hero made a quiet move to leave before anyone could stop him. The bullying team laughed at Miku for being ugly, but then Ishami froze, turned around, and scolded the redhead that she was a loser. The angry bully looked at himself in the mirror and wondered where he had been headed when he first started acting so mean. The teacher paused before the bell so that no one could interrupt his lesson as the bully suddenly vanished into thin air to summon an amazing spell for a sudden scare. So Tedino threw a wave of fire in order to crush the main character while everyone else fled, leaving Ishigami frozen in place. Mizuha sprinted forward and grabbed his hand just as a sudden burst of flame engulfed everything, leaving everyone stunned at what he had done so quickly. The students closed their eyes as they stared down an absolute blinding light. In shock, the girl couldn't believe everything had started from a trivial argument. She looked at the messy chaos of overturned tables and chairs with a sad sigh, knowing that nothing in the mess was really important. Tedino snapped because irritated felt like a storm was coming, not because he did anything wrong. When the smoke finally vanished, everyone realized the boy they had fought so hard for was completely safe, causing a wave of disbelief among the crowd around him. Minato didn't wait for a reply. He simply shook his head and stared at the broken smile before realizing that no matter how much he was trying, his magic had absolutely failed to stop the chaos in the room. The protagonist imagined he'd easily block his first attack without needing any spells at all. Tino panicked when he heard the MC say he was only being nice because he was still a kid. With a cold look, Ichukuma said that bad people like him needed to be set straight, leaving both the redhead and his goons in shock. Soon, an insane aura suddenly rose up from the protagonist. A sudden crack in the glass sent a bright beam straight into the dark, as if someone had suddenly lit up the whole living room with an electric spark. Mikai stared at a wall of shimmering, bluish mist as his classmates began to freeze mid-speech, wondering if it was just bad weather or something far more mysterious and dangerous. The red-headed hero froze in his tracks when he saw a shadowy figure approaching. The man with an unsettling aura walked right past him, leaving the redhead completely stunned and unable to move. He felt his heart sink when he realized the main character would be about to strike at him. The red-headed girl ran, and a loud roar echoed as her body shot away from the bullying giant before he could hit her again. When the teacher finally walked through the door, he didn't just see a quiet classroom. He saw someone trying to use magic right here inside, and he asked the student exactly how it happened. The protagonist paused to let out a deep sigh, then grinned and whispered, "Nothing happened there," hinting perhaps someone was summoning spells in the courtyard while he listened intently. Hearing the teacher question if anyone had done it, the MC joked that maybe outsiders were pretending to be mages before asking why the smoke was so thick. Ichikami stood up and turned to face the window as the gust of the afternoon bloated out from the street. Trusting his own judgment, the student let him in without a second thought. Almost immediately, the man said he was coming to investigate the case and walked away before anyone else could ask more questions. At that moment, the protagonist waved kindly at the teacher so he wouldn't get caught drawing attention again. He then thought about it carefully and decided to act more gently from this day forward. Yet Mizuha remained visibly shaken and couldn't believe what she'd witnessed, while Tedino continued cursing the MC thoughtfully. Minato nodded approvingly as the students seemed genuinely low-level compared to today's monsters. He wandered down the hallway, pausing to glance at the bustling city and try to spot any clues about those mysterious creatures hiding there. As the moon turned dark and shadows deepened, Shibuya revealed its final, broken form in the gloom. Under that brilliant full moon, our hero climbed high and dug deeper into every corner of the tall building he had just discovered. The street lamp flickered as he looked up at the sky and saw how quickly the bustling old city had faded away into the night. He whipped around with a glowing magic circle in hand and flew headlong into the void of dark shadows, sending everything flying at once. Even so, the MC wasn't feeling a supernatural presence at all, which made him wonder why the cops were still patrolling that ruined city. Soon, the hero felt a strange warmth press against his chest as another figure loomed just outside the edge of the building. But the shadow wasn't there to harm him. Only the eerie presence of something watching him with eyes full of dark intent. Without hesitation, he pulled out a piece of magic and hurled himself directly into the falling glass, leaving the building in its tracks as he raced toward the storm. He saw a terrifying crowd of monsters clinging to the legs of a trembling woman. Rosso! The beasts let out a roar as they bared their sharp teeth, but the protagonist didn't wait. He appeared right there and charged forward without hesitation before they could react. But then spikes burst from the ground and pierced the creatures' bodies, wiping them all out at once as Minato turned his face back to see the woman crying. Relieved, noticing the badge pinned to her shirt, the MC realized she was a police officer, so he told the girl to be more careful from now on. Embarrassed, she apologized and thanked him. The confused officer watched the stranger vanish right in front of her eyes, wondering who he was, and decided he must be an unusual mage. What intrigued her most was realizing he hadn't used any visible spell. At that moment, the protagonist decided hiding his face was such a smart move because he hadn't wanted to show up after reincarnating yet. He kept trying to stay calm until he finally understood why the police were so powerless against low-level monsters, and then Minato realized that even those mages of old had lost too much power. He looked up at the bright sky and immediately found happiness in his heart. Realizing that even in this time, everyone still needed his power, he scanned the streets with magic circles and immediately decided to wipe them all away. Later, while pointing at a strange device, the teacher announced with excitement that there was going to be a magic power assessment that very day. Minato watched with disbelief as the machine appeared just because the students needed to measure their energy properly and figure out what element they were made of. He couldn't believe a tool like that existed for something so basic, only making his power feel even more real when it finally worked. As he approached Manhwa gently pointed him toward the corner where she was sitting and asked, "Step aside. Let us have a little talk." She stood by the door and waited for everyone else, but her friends were already shouting at each other about what she said. Soon, a blue-haired girl stepped forward and explained her own identity to the bewildered boy, who stared in shock at the mysterious title, second daughter of an aristocratic family of mages. Mizusa froze in disbelief as she stared down at her own empty hands, realizing that her entire life had been built on a foundation that never existed. He imagined a woman dressed up to impress everyone, but she couldn't remember who she was or what her actual name was because nothing ever existed back then. Mizua's beautiful blue glow felt surprisingly weak compared to the powerful family behind her, making her truly useless. The girl stared at the man, bewildered by his lack of surprise. Tadano gritted his teeth and stared at the outcast as he spoke to Mizua. The young man at the table asked what a noble lady intended to talk about next. Miza closed her eyes and gently rested her hand on Miza's chest, trying to hold back her aristocratic composure as she struggled to understand why the protagonist had received such a powerful attack without suffering any harm. After a long silence, she finally spoke up, admitting that she wanted to talk about what happened yesterday, but the teacher interrupted her, ordering them to move on to an assessment so they could proceed with it. Miza admitted she only managed a small smile, realizing she'd soon understand how much power he possessed despite the danger of the situation. In a moment of power, Tadano grabbed a large chunk of his own strength and shouted that he had now claimed the prize for the day. Without a second glance, the red-haired figure reached out to grab a glowing sphere that had spontaneously materialized within itself. A mysterious voice shouted that his strength was at a terrifying 1,000 levels and that he wielded pure fire, while a bully cheered on him because he had finally made it better. A thoughtful protagonist then realized, with a sad sigh, that the number scale hadn't changed since 50 years ago. When she heard the call, Mizua ran forward and pulled herself up, wrapping herself in a swirling blue glow before placing a cold hand firmly on the stone. Tiny drops of water began to swirl inside that shiny stone as if it were breathing and waiting for something special. Right after the system announced Tadano's magic strength at 2,000 and her element as water, the students and even her teacher froze in shock. Confidently, Tadano declared these were the year's best results, guaranteeing a high chance of becoming standout mages. Then, the blue-haired girl stepped forward, proud of this fantastic score. Her classmates cheered for both of them as a testament to their extraordinary abilities. Stunned by what she witnessed, the protagonist couldn't believe such basic power existed among everyone else. Smiling, Mizua realized that her own bloodline held the true secret behind these incredible feats. As he turned his head, Ichikami felt a sudden surge of awkwardness and tried desperately not to see her gleaming smile. When the MC heard his name called, he felt a sinking dread in his heart. As the hero walked toward the device, the students exchanged glances and whispered that he was always among them worst. The redhead noted how well the kid did on written tests, but came up short on practice, while Tadano snickered and hoped his classmate would embarrass himself in front of Manhwa. She stood up with a grin and sprinted toward the mirror, hoping the MC's magic level would finally crush hers before she could move faster. Minato froze before the machine, thinking hard about whether to draw another spotlight or cheat out. As his classmates took a deep breath in front of him, he reached out and touched the crystal in his hand. In that very split second, the colorful aura flooded everyone with an electric wave. The protagonist laughed lightly as he pulled back on his wand to see if it could finally detect the ancient ruler of magic. A pile of restless energy suddenly piled up right in front of them. Right after that, a powerful light shot upward and illuminated the entire castle with bright glory. Some students were feeling under incredible stress. Mizuha looked bewildered as her eyes widened when the numbers changed so rapidly. Then the crystal shivered as if it were breathing hard, and a beam of pure white light erupted outward, shooting upward like a dying star into the dark sky before vanishing instantly. In a moment of total shock, the group finally understood why the crystal had cracked in such an instant. He stood center stage in a pile of dust, shocked when he found his weapon shattered, despite having used every ounce of his power to try and save it. Ishami stared at the group of students sitting on the ground and thought wonderingly, did anyone among them feel my power? As I walked over to the floor of the classroom, I asked everyone if they were feeling all right. He walked into the crowd and saw a stranger asking about his injury, while the main character declared that luck had actually given him a good hand. Even though he had stood right in the blast zone, watching those scrawled marks on the broken machine, the teacher told him it was the first time he'd ever seen something like that and guessed the device must be defective. He thought the man wondered what they would do now because they hadn't figured out the boy's level or element yet. Well, I don't understand why Mr. Smith wanted me to figure out my own weakness in this fight. The teacher just said we'll be doing a real battle and every person needs to show their best strength because that's what makes us strong together. Tadano stood up and began to wipe his neck on a towel while the teacher pressed for another teammate before they could get it done. The gang of thugs stared down the kid with disdain as they walked away from him. Even as that fake grin materialized on the redhead's cheeks, something else was already happening inside her head. Tadano stood up and asked, "Are you ready to come with us?" The teacher smiled warmly back, confirming his promise of total trust. The red-headed stranger strolled toward the crumbling old city and muttered that he had always waited for this special moment before stepping closer. The ruins of the world where monsters once roamed are still standing as a quiet reminder that nature has not forgotten its ancient ways. The abandoned academy had become a deadly battlefield where police and mages stood guard over the dead, so the students were forced to help each other while they waited for monsters to disappear. He was surprised to find that real fighting had been held inside there again, in this exact same quiet place from before, and he thought he must have erased every single threat today. Despite the danger, he still felt like magic lingered nearby. With no signs of any new catastrophe yet, those monsters kept showing up anyway. Confident that her classmate would win, she invited her friend to compete in combat. Mizuha turned and looked at him with a look full of suspicion. The teacher waved his hand and suggested starting the practical class, inviting everyone to join forces together. It was a loud shout from the room as someone shouted at the MC when they had been talking about something else. The protagonist sat slumped against the crumbling walls of that ruined house, his wide grin stretching out like a weapon ready to strike anyone who stepped forward. Tadano warned that no matter how loud the world got, the silence of his story would never end because he refused to let anyone take away their final words. Ishami took a breath and pulled himself together as Minato gently warned that anything irritating could be ignored. The red-headed boy snapped at everyone for ignoring him when he felt no one was paying attention to him. Furious, Tadano asked Mizuha why the bully had such an interest in someone so weak. Confused by the MC's question about whether this bully actually liked her, the redhead lost her cool with a sudden rage and began shouting, "You bastard!" Tano didn't listen when Ikumi told him to stop. He realized then that nothing could be forgiven after all. The MC hesitated and turned back to avoid being hit by the bully, who didn't believe the trick. Just as he was about to face it, a loud noise interrupted his movement, startling him completely. When the crowd turned their heads to see a terrifying figure draped in darkness, the boy's pupils expanded, so large it made the air feel thick and heavy around his face. The heavy gloom pressed against their faces as they tried to answer, wondering if something strange was really happening inside them. One gang member asked how a demon guard had shown up in Shibuya. Terrified, the delinquents wondered if Tadano could handle that creature, so he said it'd be easy to beat it. Then Tadano, confident, threw a burst of fire at the monster and declared everything taken care of. Although his friends were cheering loudly as soon as the smoke cleared, it turned out that the monster had actually received zero injury during that moment. The redhead snapped her fingers and forced a tight, genuine smile before she realized her own face was trembling under the pressure. Standing behind the hero, he realized that even a first-class demon guard didn't have anyone standing to protect him from them. Tadano stumbled over his feet as the crowd began shuddering, turning their heads toward him for a moment before he finally fell down with wide-eyed disbelief behind them. The towering shadow swallowed the crowd completely, leaving the bullseye screaming and feeling sure they would vanish in front of them. A guard swung his massive arms down in a fierce charge, but then a sudden shadow seemed to drag him back into the shadows behind him. Manhwa stood directly in front of the man, his face remaining a quiet and steady smile. The great beast felt a violent surge of power coming from beneath him, as thick streams of living blood flew out of its lungs like water in a rush. The beast rolled back off the edge and vanished into the crowd of bullies before anyone could say anything else. Meanwhile, the main character told the Dark Guard that he knew exactly what the monster actually thought about the king. And the creature paused in its walk, staring blankly at that blazing light underneath the main character, feeling a shiver run down their spine as they stared into the darkness. The air felt thick with magic before anyone could even blink, and then, right in front of his eyes, a circle of light began to form around him while he kept chanting spells out loud. Then the hero unleashed a burst of magical power, leaving Tadano stunned as Manhwa clearly couldn't match it. With two ranks drawn, the monster unleashed a powerful rock break technique and hurled a massive stone chunk at the students. The protagonist merely smiled as a first-rank fire arrow struck the stone, triggering an explosion that finally destroyed the beast. Terrified, the students covered their faces while Manhwa stood frozen in cold stares. As if lightning struck through the room, those of them froze wide awake and stared in shock at the scene unfolding before them. Tadano stared in disbelief as the master of demon guards dropped into the corner. Manhwa looked down and saw the purple crystals, wondering why demons still stood guard even though they had vanished 5 decades ago. The protagonist felt dazed and panicked because they suspected something terrible might happen just as fast as they were thinking about it. The monsters were stalking common folks, so the main character chose to fight back hard no matter what happened next. Meanwhile, the bully felt a deep rage and was completely crushed by jealousy, unable to shake the feeling he had been wrongly accused of killing the demon guard. Mizuha kept hiding deep in the shadows as she watched everyone else go about their busy days, completely unaware of what was really happening around her. It wasn't her turn to be first. The girl called out to summon a giant disk of water and sliced away the beast's legs while everyone watched in wonder. She saw her companions go silent because their hearts already knew exactly what she was about to say. The girl stared at her hands and wondered why someone would let herself feel completely baffled when she saw something so simple happening to everyone around her. No matter what happened to her, she crossed her arms with a look of arrogance, worrying deeply about the locals below, while secretly assuming she actually had some hidden gift. Then, we watch as Tadano stretches wide, desperate for anyone's attention while Mizuha waves back, realizing the bullying was targeting her friend. She stepped forward with a fierce determination, firmly deciding her heart was too stubborn to let those feelings slip through her fingers. She paused mid-thought and watched as a shadowy figure crept closer, his face an unsettling mask of the demon guard. Her eyes widened in horror as he stood before her. The girl froze as a sudden surge of adrenaline spiked under the table, making her heart race like it could never stop. The realization hit her that he wasn't ready for anything alone, and suddenly her hands felt so shaky as if she hadn't slept in days. So, despite the odds against her, she sprinted toward the door with a fierce resolve to show her father what he was truly capable of. She reached out to guide the class as they sprinted, but suddenly a tsunami of flames engulfed her, forcing her to shield herself against the roar of the blast before seeing what lay in the burning sky. It felt like a revelation when she saw the protagonist holding that magical spell. Mizu stood frozen in shock as the terrifying silence settled over him, trying desperately to piece together what had just occurred. She imagined that when he once sat hunched over and walked with his head bowed, he had been so calm and sure of himself then, that it must have turned into something entirely different today. She caught his serious face and saw he had never even muttered a spell. Instead, she watched him effortlessly defeat a first-class demon guard without any crystals. A monster's power is measured by how many crystals it possesses, which determines its rank within the order. At the very bottom of the room lay the mighty beast, whose single glowing crystal rested proudly on its golden forehead. Standing before them were those magnificent magical guardians, each adorned with a peculiarly large crystal nestled deep within their chests as their most striking feature. The next arrival will be a group of monsters with one crystal in their chest and two resting on their shoulders. Suddenly, a wave of darkness sweeps in and brings in powerful demons with 4 massive crystals on them, followed by even stronger beings who possess 5 distinct stones. At the very top of this world stands a mighty demon god holding 6 shining crystals in his hand. Every monster inside has its own set of active levels, like a unique lock for each one to unlock their power. The basics of magic are the very foundation that every true mage needs to master first. Watching through the crack of midnight, Manhwa pondered hard. Defeating that fiery demon guard might require more than just the usual 3 levels of skill. But as Minato walked up to the monster, the guy asked her if she had any strange hobbies. As she peeked through the crack in the curtain, her hand was firmly held steady against the rough wall for a split second before lifting to reveal something distant and bright in the corner of the room. Manhwa stared up at the ceiling and thought, well, I'll figure that out when I'm back home. The MC had to say it was strange that even a wizard wouldn't see through his own trickery. A split second passed as the two of them locked eyes and stood perfectly still, their hearts beating together in that quiet silence. Minato closed his eyes and whispered to the mysterious girl, daring her to sense that untold magic swirling around them, which left the frightened child scrambling for answers while he ran behind. Manhwa stopped her friend and shouted for an explanation as soon as she saw Minato climb down the stairs. As he stood looking out, he quickly checked if anyone else was hiding near him. Suddenly, 5 mysterious sources of dark energy surged into his mind, leaving behind nothing like the usual defensive demons, only a wild sea of magical beasts roaming freely around. Minato hesitated as he realized the crowd might not be ready for the big news about the student. So instead of cheering them on, he went straight to the target zone near the train platform to launch a barrage of spells that sent everyone flying into the air and knocking them all unconscious. They dropped their books in shock because a mountain-sized wave of power just came rushing down from above. In the midst of the chaos, a monster struck the girl as she stood alone, only to be instantly vaporized before she even had time to scream for help. Minato kept his eyes locked on the spot where each bullet struck, knowing that nothing could ever change since the shots had already begun. The animals began shedding their coats and leaving a trail of dust as they helped the kids breathe easier. Watching what happened next, the hero saw that he had already done too much to the point where most of the scary beasts were gone from the scene. At the very end, he finally admitted he had been holding back too hard because it wasn't actually about teaching something new anymore. Right after that moment, the man ascended high above the city and looked around, sure there was no one nearby. Then, as if nothing had happened, he dropped into an alley beside a dead magical beast and decided it didn't matter how much power he kept hidden. But drawing attention would only bring trouble. Just as the class began their work, a small boy came running in with a bag that held nothing but a giant pile of trash. As you zoomed in on the monster's body, you saw it was just one giant move. Then stepping back to look up, you found someone had cast an elemental magic so powerful no normal wizard could handle it alone. The students grew shocked when they realized without that crucial intervention, they would be in serious danger due to the sheer number of enemies. Then embarrassed, they asked why so many beasts still lingered even if they could have been taken out earlier. The teacher bowed and apologized right after. It was his heavy heart to hear that the school had given up on saving the kids. Yet he couldn't shake down that they should have acted first because it's only too much to wish for a situation where nothing is lost. They were all staring blankly when she spoke up, her eyes full of worry and sadness as she wondered who had helped save the day. The teacher was silent because she knew he didn't understand, yet she added a kind of awe as if someone had stepped out from behind the curtain to show him a truly hidden treasure. The man stared at himself in the mirror and wondered if he had actually been attacked by a cop or an official mage. He found himself thinking that an out-of-town mage might have caused trouble and decided to show everyone his genuine smile instead of any apology. The protagonist felt so lucky to hear this, while Minato watched the destruction with no one injured, only Tadano staring at it with a furrowed brow. So, even though that bully got punched, he didn't get hurt either. A mysterious Manhwa thought about how her classmate had crushed a first-class demon guard with simple, everyday strength. She felt a sudden jolt of shock as she remembered her own stunned face, wondering if that weird amount of magic came from him too. Then, recalling a moment she looked up in disbelief, she finally figured out no one can use fire and non-elemental spells at the same time. So nobody can have both kinds at once, which means Manhwa settled that it really wasn't possible. She thought in her head that only a magical force coming from somewhere else was allowed. Even so, watching her classmate, the girl wondered exactly who that monster guard was going to fight. So at that very second, the blonde boy pointed out how those laser beams looked exactly like his own, proving they were definitely part of him. The bullies watched as Tadano shot back, confirming his impossible feat while the class protested about the outcast beating a demon guard. Annoyed, he ordered his classmates to shut up and promised to finish them if they didn't listen. Sure, something was definitely off with the redhead who insisted no quiet person could be that strong. Meanwhile, the goons were just weirded out by her explosive reaction. Tadano let out a wild roar of anger that turned the whole room into a frenzy as he slammed his fist on the table, screaming, "The guy is definitely cheating, and I swear I'll take him down." After school ended, Ishami walked through the bustling streets alone while his classmates gathered around him, ready for next week's activities. The redhead walked in, cutting off all exits and teasing his friend before he could react. The protagonist stayed composed when he told them to train magic instead of getting lost in that busy place. The bullies weren't done with him. They got even angrier because that answer made him feel cheated, so he immediately vowed to prove his innocence again. Tadano hesitated as he saw the fleeing hero, realizing that shouting might not be enough. Yet he insisted that at least the man had not fled from the scene. The MC said, "I have no reason to run." The redhead looked down, feeling his own power fade as he tried to stay normal, before lunging forward at the man standing right there and watching him without a single spell cast behind him. Sure, the kids didn't have time for any real damage and just kept running toward that magical shield. They thought their attacks were pointless since someone was already safe from them, even though the barrier started forming on its own right in front of the kid. Mizuho walked forward to reveal that this was bullying, so she questioned the students of the Magic Academy and told them to leave. She argued with the bully about his behavior and then pulled his hand away, leaving Tadano stunned as they walked off together. The bully turned his gaze back on that man and claimed he had done everything wrong all along. Driven by desperation, the redhead decided to unleash a spell outside school just to wipe away Minato's anger and save her from the chaos, though she panicked as the attack escalated. Tadano and his gang charged the MC like wild horses, and he watched from the sidelines, letting a coward run past him to try saving him. It turned out to be a disaster. They melted away into the fire before they could get anything done. The girls were surprised that they didn't get hit in turn. The redhead felt her heart beating fast because she had convinced herself she could finally get rid of the man with him. Even if she didn't want it, she was too scared to take a step back and let him walk away alone. But amidst the smoke, a man stood up in shock because his words had been so childish, and yet they were all too far gone. Only strict discipline could truly cure such behavior. And finally, it was time for punishment. Tadano couldn't believe he remained alive when he heard what the man had just said. Right after that moment, Minato announced that the red-headed girl and she had both fallen into a very dangerous situation together. The bully roared in rage at the scene and shouted, "It's your fault. You shouldn't have been so arrogant." He couldn't help but look down at the innocent boy who had stood there calmly, realizing that his own arrogance had caused such a mess. Tadano fired a reckless blast of magic that sent him flying, shouting with fierce determination that he would keep fighting until the hero fell. In response, he quickly waved his hand and pointed sharply at the door. That tiny pocket of light suddenly materialized before him. Then the group of troublemakers began to laugh at his smallness, wondering if they were being taken seriously. They screamed as Minato was set on fire by the power of the circle at the back of his finger. But calmly, he turned to activate that same tiny magical drain himself. A long vine shot straight up, as if ready to shoot. In a split second, the tangled vines surged over the crowd of confused kids as they lost all sense of their feet, leaving them stumbling helplessly toward the floor before the glowing circle finally appeared above them. By pouring in a tiny drop of magic, the hero kept Tadano away from the bullies so they could learn something important. Mizuho stared blankly as the strange glow began to fade, wondering exactly how this magic trick could cause so many people to lose their minds. Mato finally stepped off the plane and watched the girl stand up as she asked him why he had waited so long before letting her in. She wondered exactly what the spell meant, and if her character even knew magic yet before they met. Finally, she pointed out that the guy just wanted to know who he really was, not why it was so hard to explain everything. The night was falling deep into Shibuya's old city, casting a dark moonlight over the streets that made the girl feel awkward as she thanked him for saving her, yet she stubbornly insisted he answer her questions. He drifted into the dark of the enchanted ring as his mind raced to find where the trouble had started. The Dark Guardians who fought so hard to stay away from the magic beast finally showed up one last time. Mano knew that despite trying to stay completely quiet and acting like a ghost when he wasn't looking, the danger had already crossed over into the real world and reached far beyond the police's reach in Shibuya. As the old man stared at the trembling policewoman in front of him, he realized how fragile even powerful people were right now. It made him feel like a fool to accept such a harsh reality. He didn't have enough time or resources to conquer every demon in Japan on his own, so he had to work hard with a plan that demanded speed. So the main character cleared out the spaces one by one without letting anyone notice his busy work. Minato listened as a stranger casually admitted to overdriving last night. The realization that a thief was following silently made him freeze. The moment the scary thing tried to bite, the hero threw a punch that knocked it out of the way and vanished into thin air before anyone could react. Minato watched from afar and immediately cheered that the guy was completely unaware of what was happening. So he pulled out his magical wand and kept sprinting onward. The blonde guy looked at his phone and smiled, thinking he had cracked the code to make a viral video. A recording preview popped up on the screen alongside that thrilled comment. The next day, the student stood in front of the principal's desk, looking very upset because the teacher had reported that some people were using magic outside the school. The protagonist and Mizu stayed calm while being asked to explain what really happened. Furious, the redhead pointed at the MC and accused him of not having used magic, claiming Mito had started the fight before leaving him shocked and confused about how a lie could be told so easily. The teacher and principal stood there, eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement as the MC felt trapped in their silence, realizing that they couldn't stop talking unless they could speak. But before he could speak, someone said it was all a lie, leaving everyone in shock and angry. Mijua shouted back that the bully and his friends had intimidated Minato and used magic. Curious, the teacher asked if that meant Minato had fought using magic too. A brave girl stepped forward with a quiet smile to tell her friend they were safe. The old guy caught on just as he was shocked by what she had said about not doing anything wrong. Mizu slammed her hand down on the desk and shouted, "You're making a mess of this," as Tadono tried to say something, but she cut him off right then and there before he even had a chance to finish a sentence. Furious, Mijua demanded why he was being so cruel toward an innocent bystander. The red-headed kid finally snapped back and told the MC that he didn't fit the school's rules and needed to get kicked out. She fired a sharp volley right then and there, shouting angrily about the man who had left his place. The guy bragged about getting the best grades in class, telling everyone but him she could face her alone. He pushed the argument even further, and Mijua stepped back, wondering if they were talking about something else all along. Tadano then tried to convince her that a student like this one would never be able to protect her. He pulled back with a sudden burst of emotion and desperation, knocking over his own coffee cup just as she stepped forward, refusing to let him dream away her words because they had already left him confused and speechless. She told me she'd never dated anyone who bullied others. She loved feeling cruel. So when she got bored with the idea of confessing to such a person, she would always choose the darkest kind of moment anyway. And then the redhead fell right on his back, staring blankly at the hero who was just smiling sadly at them. The principal looked at his own head, realizing that he had simply made it clear someone was wrong, that the bully and his friend made the mistake of using magic to protect themselves instead of protecting others. He immediately told them to leave, because a school doesn't need people who act out of pure selfishness, and the entire group was forced to walk away from their classrooms as punishment for their own mistakes. The teacher quietly turned off his lights, apologized to everyone, and walked out into the hallway, while Mijua spoke up about how she had never been so angry in years and found it very disgusting for them to be like that again. The MC finally asked herself, "What if I'm kicked out of school? What happens when I can't stay in magic?" She laughs nervously as the teacher declares that anyone who leaves cannot become a wizard again. Indignant, Minato asks her how he could stay quiet after everything they said and defends himself, but she cuts him off, leaving the girl confused. He remembers other times he got Mijua's help back then and realizes she'd always been by his side when he needed it. She laughs nervously as she sees the compliment and feels so embarrassed before telling him she won't ever talk about it again by herself. The protagonist stands over his old body, staring at the ghostly boy in the mirror and thinking hard about whether that scary transformation was really an accident or born from years of bullying he never had to face. In the end, he finally admits that even though he won't ever truly know the secret, he trusts his colleagues who are ready to cover up any mistakes their bosses made back then. Later, when the academy heads talk about a magical mishap on school grounds and confirm no injuries occurred, they look very proud of themselves for doing such a good job protecting everyone else. Mizu had a small secret that she and her family were keeping hidden, so their father managed to stay calm while planning to put the money back into the school. The whispers among the crowd are already growing strong, and people everywhere start to speculate about Ishami's terrifying power. Even some skeptics wonder if that one guy could actually beat the best mages in training. Because of that, The characters decided to dig deep inside the game world and see exactly how strong the main character really has. Meanwhile, Ishami wonders if this peaceful world will actually last forever. The kids watch a strange video of an armored wizard who barely paid them any mind. Mito calls the teacher to spark every other student's wonder, and soon the classroom buzzes with excitement as the new magic evaluation begins for those who once struggled. Mijua watches intently, eager to see if this time she can truly uncover what the main character is really capable of. Soon, everyone gets shocked when they see that. Ruka stepped into the room to see Ichikami in person, and for the first time, Mijua felt truly curious about her new friend's appearance. Mito hesitated as his hands drifted toward the glowing crystal, his mind racing back over the terrible past so he wouldn't accidentally repeat it again. The numbers keep climbing until exactly the right split of seconds passes, when the teacher rushes forward and asks if the guy is okay. The man replies quickly, announcing the results as success and declaring his evaluation a win, though he immediately admits that Ishami has no magical elements. So Mijua and everyone else are left stunned with disbelief. And when the announcer says his mana is only 100, the whole class freaks out because he's clearly the most underwhelming of all. At that exact second, Ryan starts doubting if it was the same guy who had beaten up a bunch of delinquents on his own before. Disappointed, Ruka tells him to leave, saying she couldn't find what she was looking for. Meanwhile, two students are just laughing about the MC being the weakest one there. The teacher gently nudges Minato, reminding him that magic isn't about what people think is possible, but how it actually works in their world. Ms. Wada stirs, seeing her new reality twist just when she was ready to accept it. She laughs at how everyone else thinks his real strength is ordinary, while he actually feels like a hero who has completely unlocked his secret power. Minato spent hours untying and adjusting his jacket while wondering if the stress of controlling his energy was actually worth the effort. The boy walked beside her for a while and then questioned what she had done in that spot. She stood frozen in the street while a stranger marched past, shouting orders so loud she had to turn around before anyone else got close. It was Ruka and Jun who came walking into the forest. Minato took a moment to wait as the group moved toward him, letting them stand out while he waited patiently for their names. Minato frowned as he watched, but with that same bored disregard, he kept asking what everyone else was waiting for. The girl stepped forward with a blank look and whispered, "I really have nothing to say about him." Hearing that, Mijua's heart skipped a beat, and he flinched as Ruka turned to her little sister, asking if she really couldn't handle criminals alone. With no reply, she said she'd already heard Mizuha was saved by a young man who only had 100 points of strength left in the game. Wardley Mijua confidently confirmed that the news is actually correct. Did Ruka wonder aloud whether Mijua might have slipped behind her sister in every aspect of their lives? That single thought threw the student straight into a knot of anxiety that would never be released. She suddenly felt a heavy silence pressing against her chest as Ruka said goodbye at the school gate. Ruka didn't know yet that she had surpassed her younger sister's abilities during the entire day at school. She never let anyone lose more than so much. Ruka had a massive extra pool of mana and was wielding a spell that defied all normal magic. She always walked away after every win, so Mijua stayed behind. Ruka told her little sister wasn't good enough for magic because one person from that family made it work. Mizu was trying to stop the fight when Ruka pulled her away and said, "You have to focus." The moment she looked at him, her heart hammered against her ribs, and she finally lost control of herself. No matter how hard she tried to comfort him, Ruka still looked completely empty and unempathy-filled while he stared at her. She looked down at Mizuhi with a hopeful grin, knowing he would understand what happened. At that instant, Mito paused mid-step and looked at Ruka with a grin, saying, "You're so incredibly proud of yourself right now." Mito sneered at Ruka when he stopped speaking because she felt rude, but then she smiled back knowing the issue wasn't real. "Our brave girl," says the guy who didn't want to chat, but gave her commands. That news made Ruka freeze mid-sentence, and his voice cracked before he could finish the sentence. "Oh, holy shit." Mito stepped back because she couldn't stand the pressure of forcing herself into another person's life, so the MC said there wasn't really a good reason for it all. Meanwhile, Ruka nodded, admitting that Mizui simply didn't have the talent or skill to beat her out in the competition. The tiny little sister sat in silence and suddenly agreed. Back then, whenever she talked about being naturally gifted, she felt like a queen with everything she deserved. But now that the world has changed, her pride is gone. She can't keep looking up to see if she's even enough to match her younger sister. Suddenly, Mito's friend had won the game. She froze in shock and didn't know what she was hearing. Ruka is puzzled as she checks if Minato will actually do it because of her sister's influence. Ruka stepped up and offered a challenge that lasted exactly 2 weeks. while Minto hesitated to accept a magical duel between him and himself. Even then, he tried to think of something funny about how far the man had gotten when he'd started making such a big fuss, but Ruka said nothing at all about it, and just waited for the fight to begin. The MC kept playing along with the opponent, promising to be there for the final clash. Meanwhile, Minato remained firm in his resolve, saying he had everything prepared just for the fight. And after that, he asked Mizuha what she would do, leaving the girl clearly nervous. Mizuha hesitated for a split second and then roared out, "I'd take part." Happy Mito laughed immediately, as everyone decided quickly. Then the MC announced that if they all win, Ruka mustn't interfere with other people's lives, but mocking him, Ruka insisted that her little sister would leave the academy instead. She and Ryujin start walking away as time begins to fade. Later, on a bright and sunny rooftop where he sat beside Mizuha, she told him to become her guide. Minto sighed as he realized nothing was for him. He thought he was just the least powerful mage in the entire realm, with a mana tank that barely hit a single 100. Mizuha spoke softly to make sure he understood the trick before walking in, but she felt uncomfortable when she realized he had already started using his own strength against himself. Minato looked away as if the world had turned upside down, realizing now that people like him saw everything in extremes, which made pushing for a duel so much more necessary than usual. Then Mizuha bowed and began begging him to become her mentor. Ishami sighed and agreed. When Minato heard his answer, she was genuinely surprised at first, wondering why he wouldn't accept the offer. So, the main character tells Mizuha they have to follow everything the teacher says. The protagonist laughed at his own foolishness and turned to find Minto standing right beside him, ready to begin their journey with them tomorrow. Mizu had a bit of an embarrassment for suggesting the party happen at home instead of elsewhere. It suddenly felt like stepping into her cozy living room where she was sharing a quiet moment with her best friend. Standing in front of that massive, empty house, the protagonist looked out and froze, seeing only a vast void surrounded by darkness. Mizuha paused in her chair as she watched the snow melt into the pavement, feeling a strange mix of excitement and anxiety on her face that made her think this might be her first time seeing anyone like him. Soon after, the girl quickly turned her head away as if to hide a strange feeling. Then Minato paused and called out that it was now time for their conversation. Confused, Mizuha asked why the hero was calling her by her name. A bit puzzled, he explained that everyone in the family shared the same last name, so he preferred to call her that. Hearing that, Mizuha looked down. Even though the protagonist suggested something else, she refused right away. So, he smiled and decided to start the training. Mizuha stood there, her eyes narrowing as she leaned against him, wondering why he kept asking about hidden magic when his own thoughts were already turning into a swirling storm of energy. She paused, thinking silently for a moment before realizing the answer lay right in front of them. Yes, if you push your mind hard enough, the spell could get louder and darker than anything else. Mizu smiled for a moment and said, "That's impossible. The limit keeps setting at birth so the child can never grow up to meet them." She had finished talking and told Mizuha that everything she said was actually just ridiculous. Mizuha gasped in her sobbing as she realized how magical. She knew no ordinary people were capable of knowing this at all, and that very realization shocked her by what was so plain and obvious to everyone else in the room. Mizuha was stunned as the boy explained how nature's magic worked, noting that spells alone weren't enough. Instead, intent could boost mana even further. She gasped and shouted, insisting the idea was ridiculous because it meant we'd skip decades of progress in science just by thinking about it. Minato paused his thoughts and smiled kindly at Mizuha as she began to hum, whispering softly that maybe she didn't believe it yet, though he promised to tell her all the things they had discussed. As she spoke, he asked if she was ready for more mana, saying that knowing how powerful she felt made her a true strength. Then he gently guided her toward the center of the circle and wrapped both of them in the swirling energy around them. That second, after the MC dropped everything for a single moment, felt like an explosion of pure power and excitement. The entire world felt full of that soft, glowing energy. Sudden as if the earth shook under her feet, Mizuha gasped and felt a terrifying grip taking hold of her own skin, as if a giant hand was pressing down on her to keep her from falling forward. She stared down at the hero and listened as he declared that something magical was happening in her head. Mizuha shook her head slowly as she looked at the floor, wondering if that magic beneath was indeed real or a dream she had never lived to see. Minato confirmed it, saying that if he could feel the energy, she would finally be able to spot mana hidden in everyday things. Mizuka looked up with a confident smile that said she was ready for anything, but as Minato watched, he wondered if that simple grin made him feel like he had only worked through the extra mana needed to lift her up instead of giving her an actual gift. It flew by another week and a half to get us all settled in. Soon, Mijua yells in irritation and complains that nothing is working out. Minato looks visibly tired after a full week of serious training. He still doesn't know how to use magic properly. Then Mizuha stares at him nervously as the guy announces he'll lead the magical flow again. It felt like a second chance to reach out when she finally blinked awake. Mizuha gasped as her eyes opened wide to see a new world of life, then laughed at how she had finally seen it all. She stared hard at her own hand and felt a sudden surge of magic that made her wonder if she really saw it. She looked up to check if Mina had seen him and if he was using mana right now. As she watched the scene unfold, her eyes never caught a single large detail, making her mind feel completely lost in the quiet moment. Then the MC felt awkward when she praised her because magic felt like a game she didn't know how to play. She told Minato that after seeing mana, she needed to learn how to hold it in control, always watching exactly what she drew from the source. Minato agreed, saying his job was to use that energy as quickly and perfectly as possible before she ran out. So, the MC realized she had sensed mana before and decided mana wasn't a real threat to her abilities. Then he asked himself what had really altered the way everyone used magic, and if he was ready to take a chance on it. Mijua slammed her hand down and said, "I trust you completely." Mito smiled as she decided to move forward, and then pointed out that the protagonist had taken off his coat before telling her to attack. She bolted forward to reveal a wall of knowledge that terrified everyone. Right after that moment, the girl spun up tiny water discs that whipped directly toward Mato, while he merely lifted a wall, just so, stopping them effortlessly before they could hit him. Mizuho's magic shuddered and vanished like a dying star right in front of him. Mizuho laughed as she dropped her shield, realizing the barrier wasn't real magic at all. It was a fake one made to keep Ruka safe while she tried to break it. While Mito tried to block her spells every time, she forced her own attacks forward anyway because stopping fighting an enemy wasn't just cheating, it was guaranteed to get her killed. Mijua raised her hand and spun a new ring of power around her fingers. Not long after, she collapsed heavily onto the floor and lay there completely exhausted. Mato wrapped her in a cozy blanket while announcing, "Now it is your turn, because learning to manage your magic simply means you no longer have to recite complex spell words." He started with a spark of magical fire and then taught Mijua the exact way to wield them together. And then right after that moment, he repeated the exact same spell, while his friend Mijua stood there watching with a clear sense of how his mana was vanishing into nothingness. The MC finally agreed to let the girl take control of herself and used it as a shield against magic, even though she looked bewildered for sure. Then he asked her why she had started so hard with spells when she could have simply kept her hands open and said, "Once you master mana control, you can ditch them completely." Mizuha paused for a long moment while looking at herself, wondering if this thought could actually help her get stronger tomorrow. She let him turn around and whispered, "Exactly how you do it. We gotta make her panic first." Minato reached out his arm as if trying to save a dying girl, but then ran out with it just as she began to scream. Mijua lay on the floor while Minato checked her watch and told her this new routine was going to be a daily grind. Haruyuku jumps out of the fog like a cloaked ghost, ready to greet anyone who asks for something special. The MC stared at the empty room and whispered, even though every monster got wiped away by now, the count stayed exactly as it was. He sensed something unusual, then spun around to see the massive beast storming straight at her face. Without hesitation, he sprinted forward and delivered one final blow that snapped the creature's head off instantly. Standing over Minato's body, she asked if anyone was okay, but refused to answer, only pulling out her phone and filming him in full view while he didn't catch on camera. The MC looked annoyed. He hadn't anticipated that she would start recording without thinking at all, so next time she'd wear a mask instead of hiding behind the creature's shadow. The very next moment after Mizui woke up, he slammed his head against the floor and groaned loudly, as if waking from a nightmare. She hesitated and tried again, but she soon realized that catching a breath was too hard for the sheer effort of so many minutes spent pushing through exhaustion. The protagonist stood frozen before her, his heart pounding because he knew exactly how soon the final round would end, and he couldn't wait any longer. Despite how far the progress had gone, the realization hit him that the woman in front of him kept going beyond what anyone else could do anymore. Mizu took a deep breath, then forced her lips shut while pulling herself together, realizing that despite the huge pressure from everyone else, she had finally surrendered all her ambitions to stay with her sister. She screamed for all the magic she possessed and boldly told everyone she would never let go of spells again, even though that sounded like a dangerous plan to anyone who knew what happened next. She felt so calm and sure that even at this rapid pace, she couldn't possibly have won. Even exhausted, Misa turned and shouted, Be even harder. He heard what he'd been told, so he laughed out loud and let loose a bit more. The girl turned around and gave a bright smile, then immediately stepped into a ready-to-fight position for battle. When the protagonist finished his spell, Mizo rushed back to fight again, but tonight there wasn't much left for them to do except keep going until dark when they had to stop and rest. Minato laughed and beamed while congratulating a student who had finally cracked their target with success today. Mizuha didn't hesitate and launched herself onto the earth, jumping to celebrate her amazing success. She laughed loudly as the hero praised her once more, and that sudden sound made her grin even wider. The grand day of the magic competition finally came into being. Suddenly, as he stared at what stood out as an odd thing, the hero's eyes widened with surprise. The big crowd had gotten right up in front of the people. The reporters gathered nervously as they waited for the story about the upcoming fight. As he walked next to Mizuha, his mind raced about what would happen if that sudden rush of interest wasn't just for the show. He steps into a roaring crowd at the arena and waits for the roar of thousands. The protagonist felt everything had blown out of control, while Mizuha pointed out that magic duels are actually very uncommon, causing a huge shift for everyone involved. He froze when the words Mizu hit his ears and instantly shot a fierce, unblinking glare at them, while Mizuha scrambled forward to hide from her shock. She just smiled and cheered that she had done her best. The surprise made her eyes widen as she turned toward him and gently smiled back. Mizuha stepped into the arena with a feeling of total freedom and pure confidence, ready to make her big move. She stepped onto the ground and watched as Minato smiled wildly. Then, suddenly, she spotted her sister, Ruka, standing right there on the same spot, looking startled because the young girl had never left yet. Mizuha stared hard at the fight, her face hardening into a determined grimace, while Ruka leaned in, whispering, "You think you can actually beat me?" She paused for a moment, crossing her arms in place, as if holding back the last hope of finding what she was looking for. Mizu stared sternly at the opponent because she knew she had a perfect shot to win right now. Ruka grinned, not with joy, but with sharp sarcasm, leaving the room in a cold silence. Mizu stared hard at the girl, feeling a tightness in his chest as he realized she was stronger than anyone else he knew. Even scared of the big gap in power, she laughed and finally stopped trying to pull her weight. Soon, everyone shouted that the magic duel had begun, and immediately after the first move, both fighters stood up to face each other head-on. Mizuha paused and gently coaxed the air into swirling patterns within his hand, turning it into a real, glowing circle of light before he let go. Ruka stepped forward and began to chant a spell with great energy. Minato watched the clash with a mix of excitement and worry, knowing that his rival had mastered simple tricks while her opponent was lost in the fray and forgotten everything he knew about them. The two friends stepped forward and glared back at one another, ready to see if their spells had worked or not. Mizuha hurled a water disc at once while Ruka rolled out the exact same spell. Mizuha stepped forward when her attackers hit her like a physical blow, but her sudden realization that she could hold up such strong magic shocked everyone on the battlefield. Ruka, looking really annoyed at home, told her sister, "Well, you know what? This is way better than anything we've seen before." Then she turned to her friend Mizuha and asked, "Did you get fired up by that?" Ruka looked at her with that arrogant grin and whispered loudly, "What the hell were you so happy for?" She stood there and said, "I think that's not really a compliment. It seems like a comparison." She tried to raise her magic spell back up after going back to work, but Mizu jumped in and grabbed it instantly, turning it into a powerful spell too. Almost a second later, Ruka fired 2 levels of water blast that shot straight toward Mizuha's head, forcing her to defend herself at full strength. But as she was about to fall back, she got blasted off the arena floor right in front of MC. As she lay on the floor, he wondered whether to fight over a magic contest or just let him win because his raw power was too strong for her. Ruka stepped forward toward the arena's rim and said matter-of-factly that Minato was completely unfeeling because she never even reached out for him. The girl watched as the boy said nothing and left her bewildered alone. Mizuha shivered wildly as she scrambled to her feet, feeling like she was slipping under control, but Ruka, who had already called her a fool, immediately pointed out that she had just been hit by second-level magic, while confident Mizuha lifted her eyes and decided not to lose. She reached out her hand and yelled, "I could lose this, but I only have magic." She refused to give up, and she cast a short spell into the air while Ruko did it too. Then those two spells collided right in the middle of the arena. Mizuha tried her hardest to hold on as her hands shook uncontrollably, yet nothing could stop her from falling over completely. Not long after, while Ruka roared with her pride, Mizuha lay on the floor, trembling from defeat. As Mina watched her so closely, he realized the outcome depended on how much magic and coordination were used in this fight before it even began. He stood up and agreed with what they had said. Mijua's heart suddenly tightened when the man laughed about her clumsy mistakes but praised her stubborn spirit. She stood frozen in front of Ruka, stunned by how he loved people just like her despite failing so badly. As the girl cried out her fear and trembled violently in the silence, those strange words echoed through the room like a sudden whisper that made her heart race. Minato immediately shouted at the group to stop talking, telling them to listen carefully while he told Mizuha that she wasn't his student anymore. Ruka looked annoyed and started tearing up even more because she realized her magic had barely cracked open a single door before this came along. Minato stepped up and looked at her with fierce determination, saying, "I'm going to take this on. I will win." Ruka stared down with disdain as she explained that he had been talking too loudly before, so she decided not to play him now. Suddenly, Ryujin pops out from the shadows with a big grin and sees it's actually his turn to show up. Ruka yelled, "Go!" as the runner sprinted away from the field toward his home. The protagonist held his eager student tightly as he walked through the quiet streets. He stopped in the middle of the crowd and smiled at the woman standing over him. Mijua felt shocked when she saw the wound disappear on her hand, but Minato stepped forward into the arena to keep his power in check so no one would think too much about it. Without magic, a direct hit could kill him, and that's exactly why he gave a nasty little smile and admitted they were both worrying. Standing there, Ru taunted the MC with confidence while the protagonist calmly said he'd be the one holding back against them all. In the stands, students cheered mockingly as Run decided to spare his opponent and take it easy. Then he got ready for the fight while mentally sizing up his power at 8,000, a high enough level that a mistake could kill him all along. Soon both were ready for an intense clash, and a roar echoed through the arena announcing the start of the second duel. Regidin cast without any intention of sparing his opponent. The hero stood ready to defend himself against a powerful attacker, but instead of defending, a tough guy turned on him and mocked him while trying to decide if his own skills were even enough for such a fight. He felt a sharp punch slam into his skull before he could even say it, then watched as he held up his arm to show he wasn't done and realized it was already too late. In the stands, the students who cheered for Rajuns watched as the fight seemed to go nowhere. They didn't know if it had truly finished. Instead of seeing a clear winner, the referee shouted that Minato was declared the victor while he sat there in shock before his unconscious rival. Ruka jumped into the air and saw a wild grin on her friend as they both fell unconscious, realizing instantly how thoroughly this single hit had cheated them. Minato walked by quietly while his hands were tucked away, and he muttered to himself, "It did end quickly after all," causing Ruka to grow angry at the sight of him. Suddenly, Mijua leaped from the stage, dropping a heavy weight of sweat on her as she shouted, "That's incredible." Ruka stood tall in the back, looking down with disdain as the protagonist sighed, and asked MC whether she had any real worth compared to him. Ruka's annoyance made her snap back as the protagonist sensed her immense magical power. Standing 10,000 units above Run, they stood face to face and prepared for battle. Minato smiled faintly while Ruka felt tense, signaling the duel was about to begin without hesitation. The protagonist unleashed a spell, launching a powerful magic projectile toward Ruka's head as she reacted instantly, keeping the attack moving forward. Minato calculated that at 100 gauge, the magic was weak unless he aimed for the soul, but Ruka raised her hands to shield herself and dodged the strike immediately. Then, spotting an opening, she countered with a water projectile, shooting it right in his heart and killing him instantly as soon as they saw it. Ruka gasped in shock as Minato felt completely untouchable by all the attacks that had just come his way. He watched the hero simply hand him a gesture and vanished without a trace, leaving the fight alive in silence. The kids in the stands gasped when they saw the boy who had punched them so hard for such a clean strike. Mizuha stared wide-eyed as she saw Ruka throw a spell at the boy who didn't seem to care for it. Without using magic, the protagonist dodged every attack in silence until Mijua couldn't figure out what was going on. She wondered if there was no magic at all since Minato was just watching from afar and worried that magic could only be fought with magic while he stayed safe. Ruka gasped with real terror as she realized her opponent might feel fear too, so she didn't know how to dodge anymore. She froze in her chair, staring down until the air around him shifted into a warm, glowing light from his eyes. She knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't just magic, but an ancient, powerful force that only the strongest dare to wield. After that, she started chanting another spell, then decided to use Azura Splash, activating the seal in front of her as an insanely powerful stream of water burst out, leaving the spectators stunned by how strong the attack was and making everyone shout that Minato wouldn't survive a direct hit. Suddenly, a loud boom rang out as the sky turned black, and Ruka plummeted toward the ground in exhaustion, clutching her head while she tried to wipe away every drop of sweat from her face. And suddenly, Ruka felt a hard blow crack against her skull as she looked up to find Manhwa standing there, holding a gun like a shield, shouting in panic about how he had somehow survived the assault. So she heard it and then looked down at herself. Those lines were really old. Her heart sank as she saw her own reflection in the mirror and suddenly realized that something was wrong with herself. All of a sudden, the girl laughed so hard her voice shook while she told herself the story again and again. A minute passed, and then she finally stood up straight, admitting clearly that they had lost everything in one go. After that moment, Judge Yamauka officially declared Kusanagi Minato won the championship. At that moment, the protagonist turned around and saw his students sprinting toward him. The MC leaned into his genuine smile, telling Mizuha they'd won, and she just replied softly, nodding in agreement. He moved, stood up, and promised himself he wouldn't interfere again, clearly signaling that the protagonist was free to act as he wished, surprising Mizuha with an attitude so different from what she expected. Minato blinked slowly as he felt the weight of silence fall upon him, sighing deeply in a quiet way that made everyone around him pause for a moment before they could move on to talk about something else. Mizuha's wounds looked barely a scratch when he casually admitted Ruka was the one who held back, but she let that go quickly, looking furious while Minato confirmed his student had just gotten stronger in 2 weeks and demanded she stop acting like her usual overprotective guardian. Hearing that, Mizuha grabbed her fists tight and shouted, "I'll be strong enough for my sister." Ruka was so confident that she told her little sister I believed in her. And when everything else went wrong, the whole world cheered for the pair who had just made it up. But then something hit him with such a crushing force, he felt like he'd been struck by lightning. A sudden, strange magic erupted across the room, making the crowd realize something was terribly wrong. And then a cold sweat trickled down Minato's face as he stared at it all, while everyone watched the sky. The protagonist felt horrified in his mind, convinced this must be a disaster in progress. A blond guy sitting on a desk with a notebook stared at a pile of papers while Tedino slammed his hand on the table, shouting, "Everyone needs to get cleaned out right away." Hearing that, Tedino gritted his teeth and yelled, convinced there was still something hidden because otherwise Minato couldn't use magic at that level. All of a sudden, the blonde stepped back in shock and asked what was going on, leaving Todino confused. In an instant, he began to feel dread as horror took over his face. 3 boys stood outside the large window, seeing the sky turn a dangerous shade of red, causing the blue-haired boy to step back and shout that the vision wasn't real. The crowd roared as the protagonist blinked up at something dark and dangerous that was suddenly everywhere around them. The darkness rushed over the room as he saw a man staring up at the ceiling with eyes wide with pure, unblinking power. Everyone looked down in horror because the sky itself had turned into a black pit and nothing could be done about it. The students in the academy shivered as they saw the sky darken into a horrid gray, their panic rising even though no one could explain what happened, as chaos swirled around them. Wondering if the storm truly was a disaster or just a random accident, they questioned whether something had caused it altogether. Thinking that the main character remembered the first time this turned deadly and wondering if it really was simply an odd coincidence. The first split second, huge portals tore open across the room while darkness began to creep in, making everyone jump as terrifying monsters rushed out of them. A group of terrified students scrambled out of the classroom, shouting desperately for rescue, as a kind but serious teacher gently lowered his voice to try and stop their panic. A flash of brilliance broke through the dark, and then, with that powerful magic at hand, you see exactly where the light was going. Minato caught a green magic seal just as the crowd cheered, but it was too late when the students turned on him. Calmly, he explained that at the very beginning of the disaster, only small monsters appeared, and everything would be fine if everyone acted carefully. The MC ordered an evacuation to the gym, warning that splitting up or being alone was dangerous, pointing at the sisters as they should take shelter too, while Mizuha wondered what her mentor would do. Minato replied that he was going to rescue anyone still in the building, and the shocked teacher asked if he was really going alone, calling it reckless. Ryujin leaped into the room to tell Minato he'd help too, because if that teacher's plan worked out like he had, there wouldn't be any trouble. Then the man let Ryujin go and teased the boy about whether he was going to die before the story ended. But the protagonist only waved his hand to say he didn't care, then walked over smiling and promised he'd return soon while Mizuha watched him carefully. Suddenly, Ryujin sprinted forward yelling he'd go first, thinking running 100 meters in 10 seconds would be easy enough. But as soon as he turned around, he saw Minato sprinting directly beside him, his magic seals glowing brightly on his toes. The protagonist stepped forward to meet Ryujin's classmate and immediately pointed out how fast their teammate had run, making it clear who would win in the race. That moment struck when he slammed on the brakes and shrieked about how everything was unspoken, demanding to hear just their own raw power before they could save humanity. Minato stared up at the grand school building as he felt a surge of countless faint magical signs all around him, wondering if there were any guests hiding behind the walls. After that, he leaped onto the roof of a building to investigate an unlocked window, where some magical beasts were pinned down to the floor in the hallway and classroom alike. Heaving into the air, Minato jumped straight into the door like a brave knight. Inside Minato, a wave of magic erupted, and he continued his fight against the beasts until nothing could stop him. The students panicked as the hero sprinted toward the entrance, but the monster surged forward with terrifying speed before Minato stepped up mid-swing to block it, then activated a powerful magical seal that instantly swallowed the beast away in one fluid motion. A few moments later, Ryujin sprinted up to the spot shouting about how everything was working out. He stepped into the room and caught sight of the hero, standing center stage with arms crossed, enveloped by the many corpses of the fallen monsters around him. Minato slipped on Ryujin's knee as he stepped away from the line of evacuees, his face pale with a mixture of fear and exhilaration after telling the boy not to be afraid because it was too risky for them all to stand around him alone. He spun around as if nothing had happened because Ryujin hadn't moved a muscle at all yet. He told himself his character was going to be so much faster than anyone else in the room. Ryujin felt like a ghostly weight on his shoulder when the boy confessed he wasn't sure how to fight back against something far more powerful than himself. The protagonist, seeing so many monstrous creatures vanished in a split second, began questioning who he was truly and racing through the dark corridors of the castle at lightning-fast speed, ensuring that every monster inside remained under absolute control for the student's safety. The main character bursts into a room full of monsters, punches one, then immediately slams into another wall where terrified students are waiting to be rescued before they can even see him. The hero dropped a defeated monster to let the terrified students cry out in relief, then shook their head and spotted a better plan. Just escort them without wasting time on what seemed like a useless task. In another part of the building, Ryujin was busy chopping down a mythical creature while whispering instructions to a quiet student and leading everyone else toward safety. He froze in his seat as suddenly a figure stepped up beside him and pointed wildly toward the sky, looking terrified over their heads. Ryujin looked over at the three students hanging on a string of bright green magic. The shock made him wonder if the protagonist had actually been the one pulling them down instead. As if she could see, the MC watched through the window with a faint smile. Sure, Ryan could handle things, but right after that, he felt something was off. A pink-haired girl backed away, frozen with fear as huge magical beasts closed in on her. Soon, the girl went into full-on shock with a trembling voice. She lowered her head and screamed for help. The next instant, a blinding light filled the area. The source was the protagonist, who took out the monsters easily. A tiny girl scrambled to her feet in a panic, completely stunned. Ah yes, that strange thing she thought was gone long ago has actually come back to her again, and the very same force that killed it earlier must have done the same for you now. Minato rushed over after clearing the bad guys, and finally stopped short to see that his girl was still bleeding from a cut on her cheek. Embarrassed, the girl saw the MC recognize her and told her, "Did you ever think I could save you?" And then Minato just said, "Yes. He actually did help me up." She gasped in shock as she jumped to her feet, shook her head, and gave a big thumbs up before thanking him for being the lifeline again. Minato smiled calmly and said, "Don't worry, I haven't done anything special." She felt so awkward now that she couldn't help but giggle when she heard what happened. It was a little after dusk when Reen burst onto the floor, panting heavily and smelling of sweat, wondering exactly who else needed an emergency checkup before the sun went down. When he saw her, he jumped up the stairs and told her she was fine so he could keep going. He stepped back from where the girl had been talking about him until she vanished behind a wall of mystery, leaving Rai alone with the feeling that his very existence now felt like a slow-motion crime scene, waiting for answers he couldn't quite keep in check. That was the exact day the White House president shouted down news of a supernatural catastrophe erupting in the Divine Magic Academy. In a tense conference room, influential figures gathered because they knew something similar occurred 50 years ago and demanded what should be done now. Despite the heat of the moment, the president remained steady and ordered that the magical aristocracy, the central police force, and even self-defense troops were already on standby to contain the monsters. Suddenly, a man pointed out that these forces are made up solely of mages and they lack control over creatures strong enough to attack others. The president became increasingly nervous as he realized that decades of peace had eroded the nation's offensive power, leaving only the police and aristocracy capable of such battle. He slammed his fist on the table, staring at his own trembling hand, and concluded with a grim realization. If this tragedy from 50 years ago happened again, Ishami would not make it. The boy and his girl were gliding through an official vehicle at high speed, but the driver didn't panic. He calmly declared that a disaster had long since begun and left no time to make a single mistake. She whispered nervously about a strange thing happening only 20 years ago. The guy spoke quietly about peace not being a lasting dream, while Inspector Shido explained that those two had been sent specifically to hunt monsters. Next, Karen insisted they would do everything possible, keeping her eyes on the road as the vehicle bolted at top speed toward the academy, followed by several patrol cars. As the screen flickered to life in the sky, everyone knew something terrible had just happened at the Divine Magic Academy. The news was loud. Reports told that a group of strange creatures had seized the facility and been making their way through without stopping. Inside the school's gym, a fresh team arrived to help students find shelter as they watched the reporter describe how the monsters had just burst out from behind the walls in an instant. Outside, older friends worked with newer students as a team to use magic and block the attackers before they could reach them again. They watched the whole battle happen right on their smartphones while everyone else was hiding away in their homes. A young man watched the broadcast, realizing that with every new monster spawned in the academy, the entire group felt like they had to run away at once. The crowd froze as a sudden rush of panic filled the air, because everyone knew that the strange creatures had already stepped onto the city streets before they even got to say anything. A towering figure stood atop a distant hill, watching as the town's streets emptied and the sky turned to dust, while strange flying creatures darted through the air like nothing could be stopped. Some boys in the classroom roared with disgust as they saw what was happening to everyone else. Many old folks were watching news programs from the TV set right as they stayed at home. The student groaned as a wall of darkness rushed toward his feet, forcing him to sprint across crumbling floors while screaming out for help before the chaos erupted around the room. Minato thought he had to keep watching so the monsters wouldn't get too strong before they finally left, even though they were only getting bigger one after another without shrinking in size. He walked down a corridor where hundreds of monster corpses were scattered, deciding that because the boss had vanished just now, he would wait out this final fight alone instead. Minato didn't show any fear. Instead, he stayed calm as the unthinkable happened, knowing that nothing good could ever happen to him then. Focusing on the girl, the hero pulled a strange spell and sent her away with 20 other victims, knowing it would be tough getting back together. He returned from his run through the halls, looking for a place to hide, while Tadana used fire magic to push the monsters away. He felt so drained from the last few hours that admitting he couldn't act on time made sense, even as he watched his friends wait for a reaction he didn't have. The demonic guardian stood there, its oppressive presence crushing everything around him. Shaken, the blue-haired bully stepped forward to ask why the monster had returned, while a blonde companion yelled they'd already been warned to run. Overwhelmed by frustration, Tadano punched the floor and shouted that he would beat the beast in one single strike, wondering why his own punch wouldn't have worked the same way. Then the protagonist answered bluntly, "It's because I'm weak." Tadana gasped and froze as the familiar voice echoed right before his eyes, making him instantly jump when he noticed the guard vanishing into flames, while only its legs remained standing in the mud. That incredible Minato knocked the punch and didn't even care if someone else saw him in pain. After saving those 3 bullies, he stopped and walked away as if nothing had happened. Tadana wasn't calm anymore. His mind raced with a loud scream of rage as he thought the hero had returned to save him. So suddenly he dove back onto his feet and yanked the villain's hand away, shouting, "Stop!" When he finally caught up, he looked puzzled and asked the MC, "Why did you help them in the first place?" Minato should have been furious, yet Minato simply said calmly that help was enough, nothing else. And then Tadano trembled, dropped his head, and whispered gently, "That's all." All of a sudden, the bully lost control and yelled for the protagonist to stop pretending. Full of hate, the redhead accused Minato of being mediocre and barely able to use magic. And after a brief pause, asked when the MC had gotten so strong. After another short silence, the protagonist glanced to the side and said that Kusanagi Minato had died in a car accident and been reborn with another guy's soul. The wind blew loud as Tadano roared, declaring that if dying truly forged him into something bigger than just a man, it would mean being the strongest one there was to be, rather than merely someone who could only do what he was told. At that moment, the protagonist cut off the bully's grip, stepped closer to talk about power, and asked if she really believed he was tough enough. He added that a sense of superiority makes you think you're invincible, but staring down the bully made it clear Toadana wasn't even ready to fight him right away. The MC finally realized his arrogance was a joke, so he just stared at the bully like he knew something else. After walking past that redhead, he continued through the crowd until he nearly lost his footing, only to realize how much stronger he felt in those days than he did 20 years later. And then, while Tadano was still laughing about how he and his pals had bullied the other students, they finally realized he only did it because he needed to vent his own anger. Afterward, a friend named Minato stepped in, reminding him that once again, he couldn't accept who he really was. Soon, his two delinquent friends stumbled over each other, stunned by the sudden realization that they had been hiding because they were terrified of being exposed for what they did. Teddy ran away from the crowd with a broken arm, but he had to stand still and watch his tears stream down his own face. While she was always ready to help anyone in need, she secretly saved everyone who stepped in her path, even if the monsters got too close and took away everything they could take. It happened exactly at that moment when a fierce demon guard stormed into the classroom to see Minato standing there. Suddenly, a scary monster bolted into the room with no warning. The hero didn't hesitate. He reached out and threw a powerful beam of energy, but instead of hitting the beast, it slammed back into the walls. As soon as the magic seal on the protagonist's hand began to expand, it unlocked a powerful burst of energy that surged outward like a storm of light. Instantly, a torrent of blazing fire erupted from nothingness and swallowed the beast whole. He paused mid-step, placing both hands firmly inside his pockets as he watched the patch of redness that his own assault had left behind. As the main character peered through the window, he noticed a row of silent guards lining the sidewalk and realized that the scary boss was actually just miles away behind them. With that in mind, he turned to the two students on the ground and gently guided them back into safety. He stomped down his jaw in rage as he shouted at the main character. Ryujin sprinted toward the ruined island where monsters were screaming at him because Minato was gone. But when they saw the girl he had saved, he stopped mid-step and whispered to them that she was safe. It turned out that after this moment, the man shouted to the crowd, telling them to stay calm while he protected everyone together. He smiled so kindly while the group cheered for his kind words. As Ryujin walked away from the scary crowd, his heart skipped a beat when he saw a familiar figure walk up beside him, asking if he needed rescue. Ryujin felt a sudden jolt of fear and gasped at what he heard, telling him not to make anyone else jump again. Without answering, the protagonist checked on the group situation first and told them they couldn't leave until everyone was ready to face all the invaders. The moment Ryujin heard the news, he burst into action and shouted, "No! No one can stand against all of them by themselves." He immediately grabbed his partner's hand as if to protect him from the storm, insisting that they had to work together instead of facing the threat alone. And that moment came so fast that every monster in the room was slammed into the air with one powerful blast of dark magic. It seemed like a sudden end when the world faded away, leaving only Minato standing alone. When Ryujin and his classmates saw something terrifyingly different that day, the air in the room dropped from hope to shock. The chaos began with an assault on the group, so the hero shouted for speed and then locked eyes with Ryujin before pulling everyone into a tight circle as they scrambled to escape the attackers. In the chaos of the escape, some monsters managed to jump into danger, yet Minato calmly snatched them off before they could hurt anyone. Ryujin stood in the darkness wondering why nothing else mattered when his friend was so undeniably tough, while a group of teachers and classmates stayed locked inside the walls, ready to stop anyone trying to leave again. That exact second, Manhwa began crumbling under the weight of his own exhaustion and nearly collapsed into a chair before he could even reach his feet. She grabbed Ruka tightly so he wouldn't fall when she dropped him. She snapped the floor down and told her brother, "If I'm full, let me go out of my way instead." Hearing that, Mizuha steadied her stance and declared she was ready to take the fight back against Ruka. Mizuha felt a spark of confidence in her little sister as she stood ready for action. Just then, Rajan appeared, announcing that he had brought back the rescued students, which instantly cheered up the class. He urged everyone to rush inside quickly and get joined by Ruka, who realized every student was already at their limit before anyone else could move forward. Mizuha paused in her story when she heard the name, Mizu, and immediately wondered what was going on, while Ryujin answered calmly that the hero's mission was complete and he would be enjoying his next adventure. The news made her breath catch in her throat as Ryujin burst into laughter, declaring the hero truly remarkable and promising a bright future for them to face together after the crisis hit. Mizuha clapped her hands together as she felt herself locked into battle, but then the earth beneath her began to tremble, sending everyone running in shock. The teacher shouted orders for everyone to sprint away into a safe hiding spot while they were panicking. And right after that, a wave of terrifying new enemies surged out into the world at massive scale. Seeing how big the threat was, Ryujin shouted, "We gotta run!" They all ran away at once after seeing the giant beast, with Ruka and Rujin helping each other keep their sides far apart. Suddenly, Manhwa felt like something was going wrong in her day. In a split second, the monster she nearly encountered was instantly neutralized by something far more powerful than any animal. Inspector Shido slammed his hand down as the police chief burst in with a badge on his belt, shouting, "We've got the beast under control." After this moment, the officers scrambled into perfect harmony as they unleashed a synchronized assault. Seeing that, the students felt a massive relief that they'd managed to hold out until then. Shido stepped forward into the crowd and shouted over the din, "Now we're all safe. We're going to do it right." Mizuha jumped forward, shouting that a battle was about to break out, while the officer blocked her with an order for civilians to flee, insisting they weren't just regular folks, but real witches. Shido hesitated, took their aid in hand, and ordered a coordinated assault from behind. As everyone moved with unison while holding their line, the inspector admitted that manpower wasn't enough. Saving lives was absolutely vital. Frustrated by how embarrassing the situation really was for the police, Sergeant Karen quietly managed the wounded students inside the school to stay calm. The hero stood by the line of moving vehicles as they came in, immediately letting go of their worries. Realizing he could leave the situation to the police without showing any emotion, he figured it made sense that they would arrive before his own defense team. He struggled to find any solution for the national crisis because the very instability made such a delicate thing seem so much harder than it should be. He sprinted back down the hall, fueled by a burst of invisible power, knowing that more students still needed rescue. The reporter in the helicopter shouted that police were already here, yet they kept warning that monsters were getting bigger and bigger. Soon after, she told everyone they were all in luck when the magical aristocracy came to town. A group of kids and a whole generation of seniors alike watched the news in eager hearts, waiting to see if something good came through before they got tired. A journalist urged a noble family to rush toward their destination, hoping they'd arrive before anyone else. At the same time, the noble mage Fuka Jin watched through the window and ordered silence, while his worried servant questioned his confidence, and he answered with icy sharpness. The police can handle a small crisis without needing to summon the aristocracy. The man stood up and walked away as the butler noticed him and asked where his master had gone to rest. Jin stood alone in the hallway as Butler John walked away, though the man still kept bowing to wish him a good night. In that violent clash, Shalu hit a hard wall, yet his mind kept spinning with new threats and refused to step back from where he stood. He turned his attention to a colleague, wondering if anyone could help clear the monster's entrance before too much damage happened. Shala stared at the screen and felt a strange surge of fear as she realized her own speed would outrun all evacuation plans. He recalled the silence of the world where the magical nobility stood alone, relying entirely on the useless help of a few brave soldiers who could do nothing but carry out their tasks without ever seeing the magic they once protected. Shulu screamed at the doorframe that he had absolutely no choice but to fight for relief, driven by a sudden, explosive burst of rage about how nothing could help him right now. No matter what happened, those academy kids kept battling monsters while they were surrounded by foes, forcing him to question whether even a fraction of them would dare to stay until the boss appeared. A wave of hundreds surged ahead, driven by a clear desire to wipe away every single thing that stood in their way. The sky fell with a beam of magic that slammed down onto the earth. He stumbled back, his heart hammering against his ribs as he saw a figure leap across the floor behind him. "Sholu, you're there!" the demon screamed, grabbing Sholu's arm with terrifying strength. He flinched as the dark force surged forward, but he couldn't move away from her, for she was right behind him, forcing him to stand still and watch it all happen in real time. He pondered carefully in his mind whether that beast truly was the boss. Ruka felt suddenly how heavy everything had become, knowing that this dangerous foe belonged only to the magical aristocracy, while her friend Mizuhi was visibly trembling because they needed high-leave spells that no one else in their world could handle. The leader jumped into action with a single breath, firing his arrows at the group all at once while he didn't pause for anything but to get ready. Mizuhi saw the threat coming before he could stop himself and froze in fear. Ruka had to rush forward in time when her sister was about to take a devastating hit. The softness in its pain barely managed to hold back the blow. Without hesitating to protect herself, a sudden explosion tore open the door and slammed against Ruka's chest. She gasped as the shattering glass rushed toward her, sending shockwaves through the room and knocking over everything else along with her own fragile form. Mizuhi suddenly looked back to see that her sister had fallen terribly and was in a panic, barely making any effort anymore. Ruka grabbed onto the wall and shouted loudly to make sure she didn't get caught running away from home. Mizuhi collapsed onto the ground, clutching her head as the monsters surged forward while her classmates froze mid-sprint. The girl cradled her older sister tightly as she screamed wildly, tears streaming from both eyes, yet the officers refused to pull back just because they were worried about the injured person in arms. Mizuhi felt a sudden urge to hug her sister as she heard the creature's leader raise his hand and unleash a fifth-level technique, causing everyone to realize that death was inevitable. She squeezed her sister tightly while crying and shouted in her mind for the protagonist to save her. Every second made the leader's skill grow even more powerful, leaving the room feeling like a tight, suffocating hug. With no other choice, the girl screamed loudly as her tough leader remained frozen in the middle of the chaos, mocking the misery that was spreading right beside him. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed through the area, catching the guard's attention and halting his movement as the creature held back an even stronger spell. The protagonist then stepped forward to apologize for being late, and calmly, he looked at the leader while stating he'd kept him waiting. Mizui watched the rain soak in her eyes and let them drain down toward her injured sister until they finally vanished away completely. Minato leaned over to check Ruka, whispering that he had finally stopped passing out. Even though the girl was still upset, many students were hurt from the earlier attacks. Seeing how many victims there were, the protagonist's anger rose sharply as he stood up and turned to Mizui. Mizui called out to him, surprised by his attitude, and answered firmly that he would win that fight. Hearing the girl finally see hope again, a healing magic instantly came to life and erased all of her sister's broken bones. She noticed she had recovered too quickly. Slowly, the students who'd been knocked out began standing up in shock, while Karen watched from afar as they recognized the advanced level of magic being cast and wondered who could do such things. She looked around to find Shido on the ground, exhausted and calling for her help with a tired grin that seemed almost too strong. He had been gripping tightly before Karen finally burst into a chorus of despair as the inspector stumbled back to his knees, rubbing his face and admitting he didn't grasp what was happening next. So he saw her, pulled every ounce of energy from himself, and shouted that everyone was in danger and we had to stop. Karen grabbed the inspector's arm and yelled, "It was reckless." But Shido shouted, "We must fight because giving up means everyone dies." The sergeant started shaking uncontrollably as she cried out, saying it all became pointless now. According to her, the police were defeated and right behind the officers' bodies proved that she was right. Fear seized Shido while Karen told there would be no reinforcements and they stood alone against a demon army. At the same time, overwhelmed by panic, the reporter announced that their entire force had been defeated and declared this the final battle. The three boys who'd been teasing him earlier now stood frozen in the shadows, their hearts pounding as the reporter shouted that the magical nobility was a joke and everyone was going to die there. Soon, the retirees who followed with fear, too, because the reporters claimed no one could stop the demons, but only Minato remained standing in the way. At that moment, the surviving officers noticed him, and Karen screamed as she saw a student rushing toward the monsters, while Shido yells hard for him to flee. Minato stepped aside from the warning signs and marched straight into his enemy with a grin on his face. The MC snapped and told the demon leader that he had done things way too far. He grabbed his weapon and fired the oppressive beam of light so hard the monster began to repeat faster and faster that he was about to die. The loud, unsettling whisper made the classroom silent instantly, and the entire group froze in a moment of terrifying stillness as they stared at their teacher's face. The remaining cops looked down at the ground with heavy eyes and couldn't move. A mighty blast struck the boss, knocking him backward as if he were being slammed by a giant wave of energy. It started with a loud explosion that made the protagonist realize he had been ordering someone to stop talking. As the glow of energy turned dimmer, the beast howled and shot out a surge of extra strength that would never end. The shadows grew thick as a seal clung to each wild creature, while beams of swirling dark power shot out from all sides, shaking everything into place. The scene was tense, but the hero remained steady and kept his composure while avoiding any visible stress to protect himself from the crowd's fear. As the light faded behind his eyes, he felt the rush of power begin in his chest and shoot out from his fingertips toward the ceiling. Even Inspector Shido knew the truth, because his eyes were wide with panic when he saw the bullets still in the air. Even though they were protected by strange walls, their attacks still broke through them. The hero stood up tall with all his might, raising his massive hands to shield every single person around him. As the demons unleashed a relentless barrage of fireballs, they forced the cursed entity to yelp in agony, hitting its head repeatedly with each wave. Shido was instantly frozen in shock as he stared at the news report where a magical girl burst through the door and smashed the lens. Everyone gasped, wondering why that powerful student hadn't just vanished away. Mizushi knew deep down she was hiding the real secret of her mentor's strength. Minato didn't stop fighting even when his energy ran out, pounding down on the ground with relentless fury. Seeing as 3 students began to shout with such confidence that they thought they were being saved, suddenly 3 majestic beasts burst from behind, filling the air with fear. The beasts had been summoned and subdued before their very first reaction was possible. They weren't just anyone. They were Inspector Shido and Sergeant Karen, 2 tough guys from their unit who did all the heavy lifting to make sure the main character could actually do anything they wanted. Nearing the door, the main character offered a very slight smile and wondered whether the modern police really knew what they were up to. Then he dove back to lock onto those relentless blows toward the Demon King. And just as his enemy's massive head snapped up with a screeching cry that made all energy crackle in a frenzy, powerful magical barriers erupted from the ground, signaling an even more deadly assault. Seeing that Shido yelled, he recognized it as 6th-level magic, a restriction only for the magical elite, and admitted there was no way to face this head-on without hesitation as the boss unleashed his 6th skill, Dragon Flame. The students went into shock while the reporter and cameraman stayed glued together. Karen was so scared she jumped in front of the little girl and threw her away, even though she knew it wouldn't help anyone get close. Karen hugged a trembling student who gasped as his own courage vanished under the weight of the magic's overwhelming power. He whispered prayer for survival, knowing no amount of protection could stop this. Shido watched the action unfold and wondered if there was really a way out, even though everything seemed too strong to break. Mizoha stood tall before the mentor, letting out a breath she didn't know she held because she knew the boy wasn't about to stop losing. He won, she whispered, not even looking back at him with any fear in her eyes. Minato blinked slowly and looked down into the shadowy depths of the battlefield, letting out a deep breath before he turned toward the giant, terrifying figure in his usual cold and calculating demeanor. The assessment was over, but as he extended his hand for help, he suddenly understood that 2nd-level magic wasn't enough. So instead of drawing too much attention, he pulled back to let the powerful energy wrap around him first. The main character unleashed a powerful spell of secret power and applied the 4th technique, Serpent Storm. Seeing that, the boy's classmate felt so thrilled to hear he loved her forever. Soon the quiet room, filled with sound, turned into a giant, cold wave of water. Shido gasped as the magic crackled around him, then realized that the glowing fire wasn't just natural. It was shaped by a living dragon. Then 2 huge forces crashed into each other like a thunderstorm, sending shockwaves through the arena. The water serpent launched itself forward with amazing speed, snatching its rival by the throat as they fought. Just then, the boss began screaming in a loud roar and charged harder into the fray. No matter how much he tried to use his power, Minato just sighed deeply and stood back down. In one quick move, that water serpent completely obliterated the fireball. Right after it vanished, it dove straight for the demon and swallowed it right in its mouth. It all ended quickly, and as he breathed out the smoke, the hero realized instantly that the villain had already forgotten how to stop himself from starting things again. So, all that remained was the symbol of his failure. That meant Minato had to wait for a much longer battle to start. The boss was actually a weak figure when he first appeared. A little later, everything settled back to normal as the threat vanished, allowing the main character to think his defeat was over and that he could finally relax. But just then, a wave of shock swept through the students who wondered with awe whether they were truly safe and if Minato had really beaten down the demonic boss. Soon, everyone starts getting up and cheering for the win. Even when reporters and their assistants finally felt safe enough to kiss, they still hugged each other hard. Karen hugged her scared kid and cheered, so loud everyone thought the disaster was truly finished. Shido watches Kusanagi stare blankly while he insists it is impossible to save the world alone because no one, even those with powerful magic and the power of a high noble, can stop this disaster without help. The inspector collapsed to the ground as suddenly his legs gave way under too much weight. Minato walked over to his classmate and said, "Everything's got your back now." Mizuha's heart was full of gratitude when she heard that the person she loved had truly believed in her, turning an ordinary smile into something deeply moving as she shared her gratitude with her mentor. The MC greets Yuck, and suddenly they're all stunned by what just happened. A group of eager students cheer around him, yet the hero feels frustrated when they demand a retreat. Realizing that being noticed was even more painful than before, he decides not to be bothered anymore. As she watched the mentor, the woman felt so annoyed because he was giving everyone too much attention. The academy finally announced the end of the disaster after all, even though there were no deaths and many more injuries involved. They refused to tell anyone about the student who took down the demon boss alone, So his classmates showed the news to Kusanagi and were immediately annoyed by that savior fame he kept making up. The MC is finally promoted to Class S, and his old friends start wondering if they can still talk to him like before. Yet, some girls ask what secret behind his power might be, imagining he's actually inherited the blood of great noble mages. Meanwhile, a Class S student notices Kusanagi's discomfort with too much attention, doubting that powerful student really exists. Minato's classmates defend him, confirming he beat the demon boss alone, but the boy stays suspicious and thinks it all seems way too weird. Finally, Kusanagi takes the chance to leave the room, feeling a huge sense of relief as he gets away. So soon after the class ended, his quiet student found him in the hallway, laughing nervously at the teacher's question about teasing, and then simply said he wanted to keep things away for now. Mito smiled and said, "It's normal, because the boy was actually her most trusted friend and the only one she had ever truly respected. She looks absolutely sure this is all true after all she did during the storm." So the guy asked, "Are you really happy?" And Mijue answered, "Yes, but I know exactly why. Someone else is just as upset right now." Kusanagi remembers Ruka and asks if she's doing better, and a student confirms it, saying the two of them have been talking a lot more than before. Mito thinks that's a good thing, and Yuka is happy too. Then, he thanks her for everything, showing her sincere gratitude. Kusanagi paused in surprise as a sudden gentle touch landed softly on her head, causing her to blush and wonder what happened. And then, when she finally asked why she never thanked him at all, he replied, "Well, I don't want that happening to you." At the conference, a man ends a video call with other countries, and Mizuha simply smiles in response to his move. Even though everyone is packed full of plans and stress, they still have a chance to help when the next crisis hits because nobody wants to keep things broken forever. The story went viral when students told the world about a monster boss they crushed, but the moment of victory turned into chaos because everyone in the city felt like they had been beaten back to the floor too hard. Hope that other nations will also wonder if this was a mistake before ordering their wise nobles back, so they can prepare again for the coming trouble. On that high school rooftop, a dozen friendly friends gather together for lunch. They all stare at one another quietly for a while. Ruka whispers that she needs a favor, but then decides to go after Kusanagi anyway and insists on becoming his apprentice. After a long, quiet moment inside the room, Ruka begins to speak with excitement about the disaster. The fight for Kusanagi ended when he successfully knocked out the demon captain, saving everyone from falling into a trap. Ruka was stunned by learning that the man possessed level 4 magic, a power far beyond any living mage's grasp. Despite how improbable it seemed, he still trusted him because he has always known his sister would never lie. Her sister is the kind of girl who never lets anyone get away, even when they're trying to trick her into doing something stupid, but she also knows that if you have all these amazing things inside you, you should really be able to make people do whatever they want with you. The girl got excited when she heard that, so she stood up and said, "I'm going to be much stronger." It made Ruka feel incredibly proud, but also noticed how much her sister had grown up already. When Kusanagi steps up, she doesn't just beat anyone else in the class. She tears apart everyone else who tries to stop her. She thought about that idea and then asked her friend to do something for her. It looks like things are still heading in that exact direction. So if they keep going like this, she'll finally turn into a real high-class mage and need someone to help her get stronger. Right now, she's apologizing for insulting her friend and underestimating him. You know, that request sounds selfish, but you've got to swallow your pride to do it. Luckily, the boy is easygoing and agrees to take her as his disciple from now on. So when that girl gets caught up in all those terrible things she did to Kusanagi, he forgives her, accepts her apology, and says nothing else. Her biggest tough friend even agrees no one sees a problem teaching. The surprise hits the girl hard, and it makes her think about how truly kind-hearted he actually is. While watching the two people talk, she figured out that the hero was a mystery. That same afternoon in the conference room, with the police division, Shido and Sanada were waiting there because they were needed to handle the beast countermeasures. They showed huge thanks to him because without his support, the civilians would have been wiped out. The boy tells me his thanks are plenty, so I know exactly what to ask next. Despite the fact that the search for the disaster is finished, a new mystery keeps piquing the detectives' minds. A blonde kid asks if the superhero woke up from a car crash. Even some folks claim that this severe crash made him completely someone else entirely. They say his personality shifted so much that his powers grew into something impossibly powerful, capable of crushing even a demon captain. She finds it talking about their trip so much annoying a girl who doesn't know what she's doing. A weary man flips his page and wonders, do you happen to see any mysterious figure named Black Mage? The brave mage swung away at darkness to save many, stepping into the night with his hood on for extra cover as he fought down the beasts. When they asked about this specific connection between them, they replied that despite being very different in size, the two people are actually quite similar in age. They're huge, and they can do amazing things without even knowing the difference between old and young magic. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a quiet revolution that began while he slept in bed. They reminded him that using magic inside the city without getting a license was against the law. If you're a student, your school might act on it, but because this case is buzzing around recently, the authorities have already started taking steps. They can't let him go without punishment. Unless he admits his guilt and reduces the charge, he'll face serious trouble. The detective pulls out a deck of cards and points to the board while asking, "Does this character actually look like the famous black mage?" He didn't hesitate or cry fear because he knew exactly what to say instead. "I'm not the person you think I am." That simple word made the blonde guy believe he was seeing someone else entirely, so to say they weren't the one he thought he saw. As they part ways after thanking the man, he looks back over his shoulder, knowing that the person in front of him is far more than just a normal student. Something special right there. He's convinced Kusanagi is a wizard right now because they both look alike and sound like magic spells. It's hard to find out who the main character actually is since he keeps being a good guy all along. One day, a blonde man steps up to talk about a secret he knows that the girl is hiding from him. Then the teacher begins a lively lesson where she introduces the entire class to join her S-class for today's event. The class got curious to learn more about the boy who defeated the big demonic villain. So another girl wants to learn all the secrets about that cool blue-haired one. Out of waiting, the teacher signals that the lesson must now begin.